Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing today? Dr. Heldman here, Ancient Texts Revealed. You know, when you're learning Hebrew, one of the things that are super helpful, but also can be a little bit intimidating to try to learn, is the Hebrew vowel system. It's called the Masoretic Vowel points. So I wanted to go through a brief video to show you how to use those and how to read them because they're going to totally dramatically impact the way that you learn Hebrew. Let's get started. I've entitled this Giving Voice to Hebrew, a Beginner's Guide to Masoretic Vowels, but before we go down the road with Masoretic Vowels, I need to explain how we got to those vowels in the first place. The Masoretic vowels matter because Biblical Hebrew was originally written without vowels or spaces. And of course, back in the day, a lot of people couldn't read, and so they relied on just the context and the community, the oral pronunciation of the words. And so they learned how to fill in the appropriate vowel sounds via oral tradition and context. This could happen to us today. It's not a big deal. If I came up to you and said the word color, depending upon whether you were British or you had a UK way of spelling the word, you might say C-O-L-O-U-R, or in US English you would say C-O-L-O-R, but it's the same thing. Color is the same thing, and we automatically put those vowels in. So this isn't a big deal. For example, if I wrote this word here on the bottom of the slide, as you can see there, what does it say? Well, it doesn't take you long to read that. It says, make me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, of course. Now, in the original Hebrew, this is Genesis 1:1, just a snippet of it. It would have appeared without spaces and without vowels. So you can see there, Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God, is what that says. That's all. It reads from right to left. There are no vowels and there are no spaces in there. In later manuscripts, the words would have been separated into separate words without vowels still. And this matters for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're talking about what is called Hebrew morphology, which consists of the roots of the words, the prefixes to the words, the suffixes to the words. This is a very important topic, and it's very deep and something that you'll grow as you go along. You'll get accustomed to it. I don't think there are a whole lot of super duper big experts in Hebrew in the world. There are some, of course, that speak Hebrew really well and know and understand it. But, if you're going through, say, theological seminary or something like that, you're doing it to get the class done. It's not necessarily that you want to be a Hebraist. It's just that you want to get things accomplished. But understanding the Hebrew morphology is very important as you go deeper and deeper into the Hebrew language. Also, the Masoretic vowels and spacing were revolutionary. They preserved the pronunciation and the meaning without touching the original words. Masoretes were Jewish scribes. They believed that the word is holy, as I believe the word is holy, and so they didn't want to introduce marks in the letters that may have meant that there was a character there that could be misinterpreted, so they developed the Masoretic system. We're going to dive into the Masoretic system, but prior to that, you need to be aware that before the Masoretes invented this vowel pointing system, they're called Masoretic Vowel points, there was a system that was in place. It was called, even as early as the 10th century BC, 1,000 years before Christ, it was called Matres, Lectionis. That means mother of reading. And what it means, if you've got a grammar book that you've purchased from, say, Pratico and Van Pelt, that is a wonderful series to purchase, by the way. Then what they're going to do is they're going to call it Hebrew vowel letters. And the idea was that if I'm speaking and I wanted to introduce some sort of a semblance of a vowel, I could use the Hebrew letters to do that. And they are Aleph and He, Vav, and Yod. And these letters are not vowels themselves, but they were the point the reader towards the intended vowel sound. And you should be aware that Hebrew grammar books often show the letter with the Masoretic vowel point in it together, not because they were written that way, but it helps us understand what the sound of the vowel letter represents. So right now we are prior to the Masoretes, and we are talking about what are called Hebrew vowel letters, and we'll go through this real quickly. Now, one advantage to reviewing the Hebrew vowel letters is that you can see on the screen, for example, in that very first row, I have the vowel category and the sound. So the category is what it is. This is an A vowel, E vowel, I vowel, O vowel, U vowel, that kind of thing. I give you the English name with the Hebrew vowel name, and then I give you the vowel sign. I tell you how to pronounce it with the combined consonant and vowel sound. So we're putting these together. You should be aware that when we're speaking in Hebrew, generally a syllable consists of at least one consonant and one vowel. It could have more, but in most cases it's at least one consonant and one vowel. And then give you a simple English hint. So these are Hebrew vowels that have hey in them, the letter hey. And so we have what is called a qamets hey. Now the qamets you're going to encounter again, and if you look underneath that letter lamed there, you'll see what looks like a T, a small T. That is the qamets. And so in this case, what we're doing is we're saying, look, the lamed is the way you're going to see it normally with the Masoretic text with the qamets underneath it. But back in the day, we didn't have the qamets, so we would put the hey next to it to sort of give you that sound, and so that's what we're talking about. Now, what's really tough about the Hebrew vowels is that we don't have these Masoretic vowels underneath the letter, so still you had to have some sense of how the word was pronounced. So even because there's 4 heys there, but we're representing that lamed in different ways, and so when you saw that, given the context of the rest of the word, you could be able to pick out how the word was supposed to sound. And again, a lot of it was from oral tradition and context. Now in this case, qamets hey, that gives you a la sound, like it's the ah, like in father. And we're going to get back to that. We're going to find out that qamets does that for us in the Masoretic vowels as well. We also have a tsere hey, and that gives you the A sound, the lay sound. So those 2 dots under that lamed is a tsere. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a hint, and this has really helped me in my vowel studies with Hebrew. The name of the vowel point, in this case, for example, qamets or tsere, definitely points to the way that you should be pronouncing that vowel. So if I say qamets, that ka tells me that I'm going to pick up that la sound like in father. So that's very, very useful to help you understand how to pronounce these vowels in the first place. Now we have a thing called a segol that has the S sound, and this often appears at the end of a word when we're dealing with Hebrew vowels, and the segol looks like that upside down, those 3 dots. It's called a segol, and it gives you the S sound like in wetter. So we've got qamets, which is the A like in father, the tsere, which is lay, it's the E like in obey. This is an E class vowel, long A, long E. And then we have an E-O category, which is the long O. It's called a holem. So again, you pick up that sound from the vowel itself. So if I say holem, it's a long O sound, like in low or like in soul. So if I was going to pronounce these, if these were actual words, without the Masoretic vowel points underneath, just the lamed by itself with the hey, and I knew the context of what the word was, I could say la, or lay, or let, or lo, le, or lo. I shouldn't have written letter there, but I was trying to get you to get the idea that it's that S sound. And so I would say le, like L-E-H. Now we have some Hebrew vowels that end with vav. You can choose to pronounce it as wow, which is what biblical Hebrew scholars pronounce it. They pronounce it wow, W-A-W. But in modern day Hebrew, it's called a vav. So it has a V sound rather than the W sound. So if you're really serious about biblical Hebrew, you're going to pronounce it wow. And if you go and purchase the Pratico and Van Pelt series, they're going to pronounce it wow. But I want you to know that in modern day Israel and elsewhere with the Hebrew, we say vav. So it doesn't really matter. It's just contextually which sort of universe you're in. Now we have two. We have the O category and the U category. The first one is called a holam wow, or you could say a holam vav. And the holam is that little dot above the lamed there, and it produces that low, that O sound. And so we would say low, like in soul. And then we have a letter called a shureq. And that is where we have a dot in the middle of that vav, and it gets that long O sound like luter or crueler. So it has that long U sound like that. And so that is a shureq. Then we have some Hebrew vowels that were written, they ended with the word yod. Now again, what they were trying to do is they're trying to introduce a little bit of a way to pronounce some sort of a vowel sound by just using the regular Hebrew letters. So the Masoretic vowel points had not been introduced yet. This is older, and so this is something that you should be aware of, although with biblical Hebrew, you're likely going to encounter the Masoretic vowel points for the most part. So this is just informational that prior to the Masoretic vowel points, we did these Hebrew vowels. And there's a section of these vowels that use yod to do the work. So we have a tsere, yod, and that gets that A sound. Tsere, yod, which would be A like an obey. Segel, yod. This often appears inside the word, but not at the end, like with the hey. This will appear inside. Segol, yod. This is L, like in wetter or letter. And then we have a hireq, yod. This hireq, you got to hang on to that EQ, not the ear sound, but the EQ sound, because it's going to make the E sound like in machine. So if you hear hireq, think E, and it's going to be like Lee or double E like in machine. So that hireq is a little tiny bit different, but the pronunciation is still there. You should be aware, this is Hebrew vowels number 4, you should be aware that there's a thing called defective writing. There's a lot of these weird little terms in biblical Hebrew, and this is one of them. And what it means is that we take out the vowel point and we just shove the two letters together. So for example, in that second row there, kol, which means voice, it's a holam wow, but we take out the holam wow and we just produce a holam. So what happens is the dot over the holam wow gets moved to the k sound, and so we get the word kol. They mean the same thing, it's just that we took the Hebrew vowel out and moved the dot over to the consonant. There's the word sub, it means return. It initially consisted of a shureq, which is that use shureq, but it turns into a kibbutz, which we haven't seen yet. And this isn't like Kibbutz, like a spot of land, a hotel or a farm or something like that in Israel. It's not a kibbutz, but it's pronounced kibbutz, or you could say kibbutz, I guess. And it has that dot in the middle of that vav, and we take that out. And so then we move the dot over, and we put a funny looking character under that shin that is called a kibbutz, and it's the U sound again. So we go from shureq to kibbutz, but we keep that U sound. And then finally we have the word for city, which is ear, and we go from a hireq yod, so we take the yod out of there, we keep the dot under that consonant there, and we turn it into a hireq, and we still have ear, and that is a silent letter. It is the letter ayin, and it is silent. So in this case, all we're doing is pronouncing the vowel, the E, like in hireq, E, ear with the resh. And so we get that word ear. It's just like your human ear, and it means city in Hebrew. So there is a very quaint defective writing example, and it is the proper name for King David. And you would say, in a biblical Hebrew perspective, you would say Dawid. But if you're a modern Hebrew, you would say David. So either way is fine. If you hear it pronounced Dawid, don't get on anybody because they're just using biblical Hebrew as opposed to normal everyday to conventional Hebrew today. But this is the word David. And so you can see there the first line, Hebrew, David, and you see some of the Masoretic symbols as well as the Hebrew symbols. And we take all of that out. We take that yod out and we just leave the hireq sitting there. That is an example of defective writing. If I'm being honest with you, I don't think this is something that you need to worry about absolutely memorizing as you go through Scripture. It's good to be aware of, but you're not going to encounter it very often. We're just showing it to you so that you can understand that it is a thing in biblical Hebrew. Okay, now we start talking about the Masoretes. So the Hebrew vowel letters went clear back to like 1,000 years before Christ. So they were been around a long, long time. The effort being to sort of introduce some sort of a vowel sound into the Hebrews, just so you had a way of understanding how the word might sound. But then between the 7th and the 10th centuries AD, a group of Jewish scribes, primarily living in Tiberias, Israel. I've been there. It's a fascinating place to go. It's on the Sea of Galilee, on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. They formulated a system that is called the vowel points. Most often you will call them the Masoretic vowel points. So let's say that you were using, say, ChatGPT or Grok or something like that, one of your favorite AI tools. You can instruct it to show you the Hebrew word using vowel points, because very often it will show you the word without vowel points, and you'll get to where the vowel points are so incredibly useful that you just want to continue using them. It's also important to note that the vowel sounds were always there. It's just that these Masoretes were figuring out a way to cleverly put vowel sounds inside the consonants so that you knew how to pronounce the words. But the vowel sounds were always there. Okay, so we've done a little bit of this. Let's get started and look at this a little more. So in this first chart, we're talking about the long vowels. There's an A category, an E category, and an O category, like ah, or O. Now the first vowel point that we have is called a qamets. This is going to appear primarily in open or accented syllables. And what it is you remember that a Hebrew syllable is a consonant followed by a vowel. So in this case, the letter is lamed. That's the qamet. The consonant lamed, and it's followed by the vowel, and the vowel is called qamets. And it's a giveaway just by knowing the name of the vowel. You know how it sounds as law. It gets the law sound, or A, like in father. Now there's a second Masoretic vowel point. It's called tsere, and of course we talked about this when we were dealing with the Hebrew vowels as well. But the point with the Hebrew vowels was to show you how it's going to show up in a grammar book like this alongside the Hebrew vowel itself. So they're not necessarily together. The point is just to show you that this is what the Masoretic vowel point looks like, and then here's the Hebrew letter that in prior times was substituting as a vowel. So in this case, it's going to be a consonant followed by the vowel, and we would say la. Or in the case of tsere, we've got this A sound like in obey. Even though it's an E class, it's getting this A sound, and that is a double dot below that lamed. And then we have a holem, and that gives you that O sound like in soul. So we would say low. And the way to remember these, because you're going to see dots showing up in other places on the consonant. In this case, if it's at the top of the consonant, we're looking at a holem. Okay, this is the big guy, the short vowels. So there's an A category, E category, an I category, an O category, and a U category. So we've got a short A, a short E, a short I, a short O, and a short U. So let's take a look at these, because these are real interesting, And this is everyday stuff, guys. You're going to see this all over the place in biblical Hebrew. The long vowels, the short vowels, all the Masoretic vowels are there. They're really good to know. Let's start out with the big guy, the pathak. Now you're going to hear some people say patak. I like to say pathak because I learned it through the Pratico and Van Pelt series, and I don't think there's a dollar's worth of difference here if you say pathak or patak, either way, but you want to get that ak sound. Why? Because that pathak has that ah sound, and so it's a little bar underneath the lamed, and it says la, like in cat. So you get that ah sound out of pathak. Then we have a segol. We've talked about this a little bit, but it gets that eh sound. So it's an eh, like in wetter. We would say le. And the segol is that little triangle there. It's 3 dots in sort of a triangle shape. Then we have a short I sound, which is hireq. Now the dot has moved from the top of the lamed to the bottom, and it's the I, like in sitter. So you would say le. So that's going to have a little bit of a different sound. Hireq, hireq. We have what is called a qamets hatuf. It's like the qamets, but it's a little bit different, and they look exactly the same. So it might bother you as to how to know which is which. Now the trick here is that a qamets hatuf appears in a closed, unaccented syllable. This is a syllable that ends in a consonant and does not carry the primary stress or accent. That might mean that you have to do a little bit of detective work to understand, but honestly, I don't think it's going to be a big deal for you to be able to differentiate. It continues to take that qamets symbol, and it's pronounced with an O, like in throttle, throttle. So there's a little bit of a different sound to it, but I don't think it's something that you need to get heartburn over. If you see the qamets, just assume the ah sound. And then we've already talked about this, the kibbutz. It has that U sound, kibbutz, and it's 3 dots that are arranged in a downward sort of an angle, and it's pronounced with a oo, like you, like crueler, ooh, like that. That's a kibbutz. And it's pretty rare. You won't see a lot of those, but they are definitely, you will definitely see them in biblical Hebrew. Now we have a funny thing called the reduced vowel. There's an A category, an E category, and an O category. These are very, very short in their pronunciation. And so here's the thing. They pick up the regular Masoretic vowel symbol, like under there, the hatef patak or pathak, the hatef pathak. It's got that ah sound, but you also see those 2 dots there. We're going to talk about those 2 dots in a minute. Those are called a Shewa. And what that's doing is it's making the pronunciation of this vowel sound very abrupt. So for example, here we have a hatef pathak, so we get that ah sound, but it's real quick, like in appear. Very brief. And then what's doing that is the Shewa. The Shewa is telling you, I want you to say this very rapidly. We have a thing called the hatef segol. So again, we pick up the segol sound, like the eh, but that Shewa is there, and so it's a very brief eh, like in metal. Like it's real super brief. And so it's called a hatef segol. Then we also have a hatef qamets, and that gets the li sound, like in committee, real quick. It's a quick little O sound. And so, or police, if you say police, you're pronouncing that O really, really quickly. That's what we're getting at there with a hatef qamets. Now, speaking of Shewas, there are 2 of them. There's a silent Shewa and there's a vocal Shewa. Now the silent Shewa has no vowel sound at all. It closes a syllable. That's its purpose, is to close a syllable. It often appears at the end of a syllable or a word. And a good example of this is melech, which means king. And so you can see the 2 dots. That's a Shewa inside that cough there. It means melech. It's pronounced melech, and you can see the segols there. So me, lech, melech, and it's not pronounced. It's just to show you that it appears at the end of a word, and it's included there. This is a silent Shewa. It is not pronounced. We just pronounce the kaf. Melech. We do not pronounce the Shewa. On the other hand, there's a thing called a vocal Shewa, which is pronounced as a very short sound, and this opens a syllable. It often appears at the beginning of a word or under the first of two identical consonants, and in this case we've got the word devarim, which means words, so that da there, that dalet, has a vocal Shewa under it, so you would say very quickly da, devarim, like that. And this is an example of silent and vocal Shewas. And again, if you recognize the Shewa, that's the main point. And if you can memorize the little times when one of the two of them are going to appear, that's all the more helpful. But as you study your Hebrew, you will encounter these things, and it will cause you to dig and go find out more information about them. Now, this is a very unusual thing. It's also very rare, but sometimes, infrequently, but sometimes, when a holem, remember that holem is the dot at the top of the consonant, when a holem is used with the letter Shin, which has a dot over the left side of what looks like a W, or a Shin, which has a dot over the right side of that letter, which looks like a W, that is Sin and Shin respectively, the two dots can combine. And so there's an example of a word, it's called yoshvim, which means sitting or dwelling. You find that in 1 Kings 22:10. On the left side of the screen you see yoshvim spelled normally, but the two dots wind up showing up over the Shin, and so you still pronounce it yoshvim, but we're just trying to show you that there's a little oddity or an irregularity here where two dots have combined over one consonant. Speaking of two dots combining, we can have what is called a Dagesh Forte, and this is really an exotic thing. So it looks exactly like a Dagesh Lene in what is called a Bagad Kafat letter. Now, let me explain that. So Bagad Kafat is just a shortened way of memorizing the letters that can have a Dagesh Lene inside them. So in the middle row there, you can see the Bagad Kafat letters. So there's Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Kaf, Pe, and Tav, or Tau. And they have a dot inside them. That dot is the Dagesh Lene. And so if I take the dot out, they get a soft sound, like Bet would be Va, rather than the hard B sound. So you should be aware these show up everywhere. So the Bagad Kafat letters, with and without the Dagesh Lene, dictate how you are going to pronounce that particular letter. But there is a second category in which we double a letter, and in this case, heavens, ha shamarim. You can see here that on the left-hand side of your screen we have the he, and that's a pathic, so we get the ha, sha, like that. And there is a dot inside that shin. What that means is technically that should be drawn as two shins, but we don't draw it as two shins, we draw it as just one. And so it is called a Dagesh Forte, and you will run into it intermittently. It's not frequent, but it's intermittent. Now, as you're studying Hebrew, I use ChatGPT and Grok and other AI tools a lot. And what I have done is I have trained ChatGPT to provide all of my Hebrew for me using the Masoretic vowel points, because honestly, for example, I was going through the Duolingo Hebrew course for a while just to get accustomed to modern Hebrew, but my problem with modern Hebrew is very few of the Masoretic vowel points are included, so as you're going through Duolingo, you don't get any of them, and I'd be trying to figure out how this word is pronounced. So I would resort to ChatGPT, but I had a rule in there where I said, please show me these using the Masoretic vowel points so I have a clearer idea of how to pronounce the word. And that I have found that to be very, very helpful. Now, the Masoretic vowel points, you're going to struggle with a little bit, but once you learn them, they turn out to be incredibly useful for you. Do I ever use the Hebrew vowel points? I do not. That is merely an informational point of reference for you. But if you were studying, say, the Dead Sea Scrolls, you might run into the Hebrew because the Masoretic vowel points had not been invented yet. And so as you're reading the Dead Sea Scrolls, you might run into Hebrew alphabet letters, and you just got to know that it's using that as a method of showing you a vowel. So that might make it a little bit more difficult in your studies. It's strictly a biblical Hebrew thing as you get more advanced in biblical Hebrew. But in my case, normally of a day, I am worried about the Masoretic vowel points. You need to know them. You probably should memorize the way that they look and how they're pronounced. They will be infinitely helpful to you in your study of Hebrew. I hope this video was enjoyable to you. There's a ton of training out there on these, and you can still get confused when you go back and back and back. You'll be like, oh yeah, that's right, that's how that's pronounced. So it's going to take you a while to get used to it. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you would like the video for me. And also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to grow the channel, and feel free to leave any comments. My goal here is to create interesting and teachable content pertaining to the scriptures and other side documentation that enhances one's learning in this arena. Hence the pseudepigrapha, the apocrypha, the ancient church fathers, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so forth. So I'm trying to create a more well-rounded experience in the scriptures. That's my whole goal with this channel. Hope you enjoy the channel. I want to say to you, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and you have a wonderful, wonderful day. May God richly bless you.